I remember the last Halloween my friends and I ever went trick-or-treating. We were 17, but we were all still kids at heart, and honestly, I think we would have kept going even after that, if not for what happened that night. It was me, Javier, and Blaine. Every year we had this tradition, meeting up at Javier's house to change into our costumes. We'd always pick a theme, and this year it was Marvel's superheroes. I was Iron Man, Javier was Captain America, and Blaine was the Hulk. Javier and I cracked up when Blaine came out of his room in his huge inflatable Hulk costume, stumbling around and knocking into everything. He looked like he was about to tear the whole house down. After we got our laughs in and grabbed our bags, we piled into Javier's car. We had our Halloween routine down to a science. We knew which neighborhoods gave out the best candy, and our first stop was always this one place that had full-size candy bars. Jackpot every year. For the first hour, everything was normal, running from house to house, filling our bags and trying to outdo each other with jokes and dares. But as the night wore on and it got darker, we decided to hit up this sketchier neighborhood down the road. It wasn't the nicest area, but we had gotten some good stuff there in the past. We parked on the edge of the neighborhood and started making our way down the street. It wasn't long before we realized that most of the houses had already turned off their porch lights. The trick-or-treating was over. Still, we didn't feel like calling it a night just yet, so we decided to walk around a bit before heading back to the car. And that is when I noticed him. About 50 feet behind us, there was a guy dressed in a Michael Myers costume. You know, the white mask, the jumpsuit, everything. I nudged Blaine and Javier and pointed him out. Javier, always the loud one, turned around and shouted at the guy, telling him nice outfit. The guy didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at us. Javier shrugged it off, but I felt uneasy. Something about the way the guy just stood there, silent, gave me the creeps. We started walking again, but a few minutes later I looked back and that guy was still there, following us, closer this time. I told Javier, who turned around and yelled at him again. He called him a couple of names, but the guy didn't move, didn't say a word, just stared. That's when Javier took a few steps towards him. He threatened him that he would regret it if he didn't stop following us. The guy didn't flinch. I pulled on Javier's arm, telling him it wasn't worth it. Javier flipped the guy off and came back to us, but we all started walking a little faster. I glanced back one more time and felt a chill run down my spine. The guy was even closer now, and under the street light, I saw it. He was holding a large kitchen knife, just like in the movie. I whispered to Blaine, asking him if he thought it was real. He didn't have to respond for me to see the fear in his eyes. Javier, still trying to act tough, said there was no way it was real, but even he picked up the pace. We all did. The guy in the Michael Myers costume matched our speed, walking faster as did we, until finally reaching Javier's car. We practically dove inside, slamming the doors shut. I shouted at Javier to lock the doors, which he did. The locks clicked into place, but the guy was right there, standing just a few feet in front of the car. He lifted the knife and slowly dragged it across the hood, leaving a deep scratch that made the worst screeching sound I'd ever heard. Blaine screamed at Javier to get out of there. Javier didn't need to be told twice. He threw the car into reverse, peeled out of there, and sped down the street. As we pulled away, I looked back one last time. The guy was just standing in the middle of the road, just watching us drive off. I couldn't shake that feeling that he was smiling under that mask. We didn't say a word the whole ride back to Javier's house. When we finally got there, we locked the doors and went straight to his room. At first, we tried to laugh it off, making jokes about how crazy the guy had been, but Blaine couldn't shake it. He kept saying that he thought the guy would actually have hurt us. We were sorting through our candy when we heard it, the unmistakable sound of something tapping against the window. We all turned at once, and there he was. The guy in the Michael Myers costume was standing outside the window, staring right at us. We screamed. All three of us bolted out of the room and ran to Javier's dad. He grabbed a bat and ran outside, but by the time he got there, the guy was gone. The only thing left was that kitchen knife, lodged into the siding of the house. To this day, we have no idea who that guy was. Maybe it was part of a twisted prank, but part of me still thinks he really wanted to hurt us. We never went trick-or-treating again. Growing up, my big brother Sam was everything I wanted to be. Cool, fearless, and always the center of attention. He had this effortless charm, the kind that made everyone gravitate towards him. He was also a bit of a troublemaker though. Nothing too serious, he just liked pushing the boundaries. And me, I was the annoying little brother who always wanted to tag along. I remember one Halloween when I was 9, I think. I usually went trick-or-treating with my younger cousins, while Sam, being older, went off with his friends. But that year, I was determined to go with Sam. I begged him over and over until finally he sighed and said fine. But he said I'd have to go through initiation first. I had no idea what that meant, but I agreed. Anything to hang out with my big brother. Halloween night came and I was buzzing with excitement. I put on my Spider-Man costume and rushed into Sam's room. He wasn't even dressed yet, which really confused me. When he saw me, he just grinned. He said I had forgotten that I had to pass the initiation test before I could go out with him and his friends. I actually had forgotten about it. I nodded and asked what it was. Sam just laughed and told me I'd find out soon. He grabbed his car keys and told me to get in. Sam drove to pick up his friends Rico and Pete. They were laughing the whole way while I sat in the back, unsure of what was coming. We pulled up in front of this old, abandoned house. It looked like it was ready to collapse, with broken windows and a sagging roof. I asked Sam why we were here. Sam turned to me, his face serious for once. He then told me about the house, a story I will never forget. He said, years ago, a guy killed his wife in there, chopped her head off. They say every Halloween, her ghost, headless, wanders around, looking for her head. A chill ran down my spine. I asked Sam if he was just trying to scare me, and he shook his head no. But Pete and Rico were obviously trying to keep from laughing, but failing to do so. I couldn't tell if Sam was being serious or not. Sam then asked me if I still wanted to go out with him and his friends. I nodded my head yes. He then told me what I had to do. He told me I had to go inside, get a pumpkin from the second floor, and bring it back. If I did that, then I could go out with them. And if I didn't, then he was taking me home. I didn't want to admit how terrified I was. I glanced at the house, then back at Sam. I wanted so badly to impress him, to prove I wasn't just his annoying little brother. So, I agreed to do it. As I got out of the car, Rico and Pete couldn't keep their failed attempts of laughing in, but I couldn't tell if they were laughing at me or just the situation. The front door of the house was unlocked, so I pushed it open and stepped inside. It smelled like dust and mold. The floor creaked under my feet, and the dim light filtering through the windows barely lit the way. I spotted the staircase right away, its steps sagging and rotting. I took a deep breath and climbed up, each step groaning beneath me. At the top, 3 doors faced me. Sam hadn't said which room the pumpkin was in. I opened the first door. Nothing but trash scattered across the floor. The second room was the same. My heart pounded as I approached the third door, the one at the end of the hall. It was darker in there, no windows to let the fading daylight in. I pushed the door open. The room was pitch black, and I couldn't see anything. I stepped inside, squinting, trying to make out the shape of the pumpkin. Then, I heard a voice. "I don't think you should be in here, kid." My heart stopped. The voice was low, coming from the far corner of the room. I didn't want to see who or what it was. I screamed and bolted for the stairs, my feet barely touching the steps as I ran down. As I reached the bottom, I crashed into someone. For a split second, I thought it was the ghost, but then I looked up and saw Sam. I tried to tell him that someone was up there, but it was probably barely understandable. Sam laughed. He told me that no one was up there, and he had just made the whole story up, and that I made it way further than he expected. I shook my head, trying to convince him, but before I could say another word, we both heard it. The creak of footsteps above us. We froze, staring up at the ceiling. The footsteps grew louder, moving towards the top of the stairs. Then we heard a door slowly creak open. Without saying a word, Sam grabbed my arm and dragged me out of that house. We scrambled into the car, and Sam peeled out of the driveway, his friends shouting in confusion. As we sped away, I glanced back at the house. There, in one of the second floor windows, a figure stood, a man. He was watching us, smiling. Sam didn't say a word for the rest of the drive. I had never seen him so scared. To this day, we don't know who or what was in that house, but I do know one thing. Sam never brought up initiation again, and we never went back. Halloween has never been my favorite holiday. I don't mind the costumes or the decorations, but something about it just feels off. Maybe it's the weird people who come out, or the fact it's always dark so early. However, I did always enjoy watching the kids trick-or-treat. They'd come up to the house all dressed up, and I'd pass out candy while my parents took out my little brother for his rounds. Every year, I'd stay home, watch scary movies, and hand out candy to the little witches and superheroes that showed up. That night, my senior year, started the same way as every Halloween before it. I watched as my parents and little brother left, their laughter fading down the street. I turned on the porch light, grabbed the candy bowl, and settled in on the couch, flipping through the channels until I finally landed on Friday the 13th, the original classic. I plopped down, ready for a quiet evening of movie watching and candy passing. Not even 10 minutes in, the doorbell rang. I hopped up, opened the door, and smiled at the group of kids yelling trick or treat. Their costumes were adorable. Tiny pirates, princesses, and skeletons. I handed out candy, complimented their outfits, and watched them scamper off. This went on for the next hour. Doorbell, candy, smiles, repeat. I barely had time to sit back down between the groups. Then, around 8:30, the doorbell rang again. I got up, bowl in hand, expecting another swarm of excited kids. But when I opened the door, there was just one person. A tall figure, dressed in all black. Black pants, a black hoodie, and a red demon mask. The mask was disturbing, its exaggerated features twisted in a grotesque grin. But what really got me were the eyes. Through the holes in the mask, I could see their eyes, locked on me, staring, unblinking. I stood there, awkwardly holding a bowl of candy, waiting for them to say something. But they didn't. No trick or treat, no motion for candy, just silence. I tried to smile, half-heartedly, and reached out to drop some candy in their bag. But that's when I realized they didn't have a bag. I asked if I could help them, but no response. They just stood there, their eyes staring straight into mine. The silence stretched out, and unease grew. I asked again if they needed something, louder this time. Nothing. Annoyed and a little more freaked out, I shouted at them, telling them to stop being a creep and to leave. Then, I slammed the door in their face. I peeked through the window next to the door, trying to see if they'd left, but I couldn't get a good angle. My heart was racing. This is exactly why I wasn't a fan of Halloween. The weirdos always come out. I sat back down, determined to ignore it, and tried to get back into the movie. I even ate a few pieces of candy to calm my nerves. It didn't take long, but I got back into the movie and forgot about that creepy person. A few minutes later, the doorbell rang again. Grabbing the candy bowl, I walked to the door and I opened it, and nearly dropped the bowl. It was the same person, still standing there, still in the same position, arms at their sides, eyes locked on me. It was as if they hadn't moved at all. My chest tightened and I felt my pulse in my throat. I asked again what they wanted. I tried to seem fierce, but the way my voice was cracking, I wasn't fooling anyone. As before, no response or movement from the person. I was absolutely terrified. I tried to slam the door again, but it stopped short. Confused, I looked down and saw their foot wedged in the doorframe, keeping it from closing. Panic hit me as I glanced back up. Through the narrow crack in the door, I could see their mask pressed up against it, one eye staring directly at me through the slit. I screamed and backed off the door just a bit, and then falling into the door, trying to close it as hard as I could. But as I pushed, there was a scream. The person's hand was caught in the door. They yanked it back, and I threw the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. My heart was hammering in my chest as I backed away, grabbing my phone. I called my dad, and when he picked up, I stammered through the story. As I spoke, there was a loud, violent banging on the door. I could hear my dad telling me to call the police, that they were on their way home, but my mind was racing. I hung up and dialed 911, frantically explaining the situation to the dispatcher. They told me to stay on the line and lock myself in a room, but before I could move, there was a loud crash, the sound of glass shattering. The person had just broke the front window. I looked over long enough just to see them sticking their hand through the broken part of the window. I screamed and bolted upstairs, tears streaming down my face as I locked myself in my bedroom. The dispatcher was still on the phone, trying to get me to calm down. telling me the police were on their way, but all I could do was cry and beg for help. I crawled under my bed, clutching the phone, every second stretching out like an eternity. It was silent for what felt like forever. I didn't know if they were still in the house or if they had left. Then I heard my dad's voice calling my name from downstairs. I crawled out from under the bed and ran down, throwing myself into his arms. The police arrived a few minutes later. They searched the house, but the intruder was gone. All they found was the shattered window and deep scratches on the front door. I never saw the person again, but that night haunts me. I haven't celebrated Halloween since, and every time I hear a knock at the door, I can't help but remember those eyes staring back at me through the mask.